Raj Malhotra and Anaya Singh looked like the perfect couple. His life built on success in Canada, her beauty and charm flown in from India. But on their wedding night, their love story collapsed into bloodshed, exposing a double life so twisted it shocked an entire nation. The Crime Scene presents a new page of crime, a new mystery, a new shock case. Raj Malhotra was the kind of guy people pointed at and said, he's got it all. Born and raised in Canada to hard-working immigrant parents, he built a career in engineering, drove a sleek car, and carried himself like someone who knew where he was headed in life. His family had been pressuring him for years to settle down, to find a bride who could match the tradition and values his parents held close. When Raj finally introduced them to Anaya Singh, it felt like the missing piece to a puzzle they'd been waiting to finish. She was gorgeous, sharp, and carried herself with grace that instantly won everyone over. The match looked picture-perfect, and soon the wedding preparations were rolling out like a royal event. Guests flew in from India, hotels were booked across Toronto, and the Malhotra family spared no expense. The ceremony itself was something out of a movie. Flashy outfits, tables stacked with food, gold jewelry catching the lights, and endless laughter painted the scene. Videographers captured every step. Photographers followed the couple like they were celebrities, and the crowd of hundreds danced till their feet gave out. Everyone saw Raj beaming as if he had struck gold, while Anaya stood beside him in layers of red silk, jewels hanging heavy on her frame, smiling just enough to look flawless. Whispers floated through the room about how lucky Raj was. Friends clapped him on the back, saying he'd hit the jackpot. His parents walked around like royalty, glowing with pride. No one doubted the love story playing out in front of them. On the surface, it seemed perfect, almost too perfect. What nobody could guess, not even Raj himself, was that behind Anaya's flawless makeup and polished demeanor, something darker was tucked away. The kind of secret that could burn down everything in one single night. Even before the vows were exchanged, small cracks in the perfect picture started to show. Relatives on Raj's side couldn't help but notice how rushed Anaya's family seemed during the entire engagement process. The gifts they sent looked excessive: gold bangles, silk saris, and stacks of cash that seemed almost overcompensating. Outsiders chalked it up to cultural pride, but for some who paid closer attention, it came across like desperation. Almost as if Anaya's parents were eager to get her married off as quickly as possible, and no one questioned why. Raj was too caught up in the whirlwind to care. He was smitten, blind to the red flags flashing in plain sight. But his cousin, who had a habit of noticing things others ignored, started pointing out strange patterns. Anaya's phone buzzed constantly, and she always stepped away to take her calls. When asked, she brushed it off as friends back home checking in, but her voice dropped to a whisper every time she answered. There were also late-night text notifications she scrambled to hide whenever someone glanced her way. The excuses sounded harmless enough, but the energy around her told a different story. Some relatives whispered about how uneasy she looked whenever the topic of her life in India came up. She dodged questions with smiles and vague answers, leaving people suspicious but not bold enough to push further. Raj's mother even mentioned she got a strange vibe, but Raj brushed it off, saying nerves were natural before a wedding. By the time the ceremonies kicked off, the doubts were buried under the noise of celebration. Everyone drowned their questions in music and champagne. No one realized those subtle signs, the hushed calls, the nervous looks, the over-the-top dowry, were warning shots for what was about to explode. Anaya wasn't just carrying secrets. She was carrying a whole other life. The reception carried on like a dream, a blur of lights, camera flashes, and music so loud the walls shook. Friends toasted to Raj's future, dancers flooded the floor, and Anaya looked every bit the picture-perfect bride, her laughter floating above the noise. By the time the last guest stumbled out and the photographers packed up, it was close to midnight. The couple slipped away to their luxury Toronto apartment, the one Raj had decorated for their first night together. Everyone imagined what was about to happen behind those doors would be the start of a long and happy life. Nobody pictured what would actually unfold. Inside, the mood shifted fast. Raj poured drinks, still glowing from the night, but Anaya looked restless. She excused herself, clutching her handbag a little too tightly, disappearing into the bedroom. That's when Raj noticed something off. Her phone buzzed again, but this wasn't the phone she used around family. It was a second phone, sleek and hidden in her bag, now lighting up with notifications. Curiosity turned to suspicion, and Raj picked it up. The screen lit with messages that didn't just raise questions, they shattered everything. There were love notes, voice recordings, even photos with another man back in India. The texts revealed financial transactions, money transfers disguised as gifts, hints of promises and future plans that didn't include Raj. His heart pounded as the truth hit like a hammer. Anaya hadn't come to Canada to start fresh with him. She was balancing a double life, weaving lies so carefully that not even her new husband suspected until now. What should have been the most intimate night of Raj's life twisted into betrayal. Instead of love, the air grew heavy with rage. The fairy tale collapsed in seconds, leaving Raj staring at proof that his bride was never really his. The wedding night was no longer a beginning. It had become the spark of a nightmare. The night that had begun with champagne toasts and glittering lights turned into something darker than anyone could imagine. After finding the messages and transfers on Anaya's hidden phone, Raj's pulse raced like a ticking bomb. The betrayal clawed at his chest, twisting every ounce of joy into raw fury. Hours earlier, he had walked into his apartment with the woman he believed was his soulmate. Now, all he saw was someone who had played him for a fool, using his love as a cover for her secret world. The rage kept building until it finally snapped. Sometime after 2 in the morning, the neighbors in the upscale building heard heavy thuds and muffled screams echoing through the walls. Most brushed it off, assuming the newlyweds were either arguing or carrying on the kind of passionate noise that followed wedding nights. No one thought to check. Behind the locked door, however, the scene was nothing close to passion. Raj had exploded, striking Anaya again and again until the life drained from her body. Glass shattered, lamps toppled, and the room transformed into a crime scene painted in streaks of blood. By the time silence fell, Anaya lay motionless, her face swollen and battered beyond recognition, her ornate wedding jewelry scattered across the floor like discarded trinkets. The luxury suite that had been decorated for love now reeked of violence and despair. Raj sat in the middle of the chaos, trembling hands stained red, staring blankly at the woman he had once sworn to protect. The hours dragged as he slipped into a numb daze, unable to process the reality of what he had done. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds, illuminating the horror that had unfolded. The bride, once celebrated as the jewel of the wedding, was now lifeless in the very dress she had worn to seal her vows. The dream was gone, replaced by a nightmare carved into the walls of that room forever. When the sun finally rose, the luxury apartment looked less like a honeymoon suite and more like the set of a crime drama. Raj hadn't called anyone, hadn't left the room, and hadn't even moved from where he sat staring at Anaya's body. His phone buzzed nonstop, family, friends, cousins checking in after the wedding, but he ignored every call until his brother grew worried. When no one could reach him, the family drove over, pounding on the door. Raj never answered. Concern turned into panic, and soon police were called to force their way inside. What the officers found was pure chaos. Blood spattered across the bed sheets and smeared on the. Sometime after 2 in the morning, the neighbors in the upscale building heard heavy thuds and muffled screams echoing through the walls. Most brushed it off, assuming the newlyweds were either arguing or carrying on the kind of passionate noise that followed wedding nights. No one thought to check. Behind the locked door, however, the scene was nothing close to passion. Raj had exploded, striking Anaya again and again until the life drained from her body. Glass shattered, lamps toppled, and the room transformed into a crime scene painted in streaks of blood. By the time silence fell, Anaya lay motionless, her face swollen and battered beyond recognition, her ornate wedding jewelry scattered across the floor like discarded trinkets. The luxury suite that had been decorated for love now reeked of violence and despair. Raj sat in the middle of the chaos, trembling hands stained red, staring blankly at the woman he had once sworn to protect. The hours dragged as he slipped into a numb daze, unable to process the reality of what he had done. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds, illuminating the horror that had unfolded. The bride, once celebrated as the jewel of the wedding, was now lifeless in the very dress she had worn to seal her vows. The dream was gone, replaced by a nightmare carved into the walls of that room forever. Detectives wasted no time tearing into the case, and what they uncovered made the story spiral even further out of control. Anaya's phone was a goldmine of secrets, spilling open a side of her life no one at the wedding had seen coming. Investigators traced financial records showing she had been funneling money overseas, sending large sums back to a man in India who appeared to be much more than a friend. Photos of the two together, cozy and intimate, painted the picture of a relationship that didn't end just because she got married in Canada. To the police, it looked like Raj wasn't her true husband. He was her ticket to a new passport, a new country, and a chance to start fresh while keeping her ties overseas alive. But the deeper they dug, the more twisted it got. There were messages to other men, not just one. Promises of marriage, pleas for money, and notes of affection were scattered across different chat logs. Detectives believed Anaya had been running multiple schemes, stringing along wealthy men in exchange for financial support. The expensive dowry her family brought to Canada suddenly raised questions. Was it really tradition, or just a way to mask debts owed to dangerous people back home? Some files even suggested she had ties to underground loan sharks in Punjab, leaving her tangled in obligations she couldn't escape. The story blew up in the tabloids, sparking heated debates. Some saw Anaya as a manipulative con artist who gambled with too many lives. Others painted her as a victim, trapped by cultural pressures and money trouble, trying to claw her way out any way she could. Raj's crime was undeniable, but the question of who really wore the villain's mask kept everyone arguing. The investigation had revealed layers so messy that even the detectives admitted it blurred the line between victim and predator. Raj's trial became a spectacle that gripped the country. Courtrooms were packed with reporters, families, and curious onlookers who couldn't resist watching the downfall of what had once looked like a fairy tale romance. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture of a groom who snapped on his wedding night, brutally murdering his bride in cold blood. They displayed photos of the blood-soaked apartment, forensic evidence, and medical reports that detailed the extent of Anaya's injuries. The jury listened in silence, some visibly shaken by the brutality described. The defense took a different angle. They argued that Raj wasn't just a killer. He was a man pushed to the edge after discovering his wife's betrayal. They leaned on the digital evidence, showing screenshots of Anaya's double life, her hidden phone filled with conversations and money transfers. The defense tried to spin the narrative into one of provocation, claiming Raj lost control in a moment of devastating shock. Families on both sides clashed outside the courthouse, shouting for justice, each convinced the other was responsible for the tragedy. The media feasted on the story, turning it into daily headlines. Talk shows debated whether Anaya was a victim of cultural pressures or a schemer who played too many dangerous games. Social media flooded with split opinions. Some sympathized with Raj's heartbreak, while others demanded he face the harshest penalty for ending a life with his bare hands. In the end, the jury returned a guilty verdict for second-degree murder. Raj was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 15 years. He showed little emotion as the decision was read, staring at the floor as if he already knew how it would end.